Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Tiffany A. Flowers, and I am the creator of Work Gigs for a Fractured Economy. In doing this series, I actually received an email from someone who said, why create a series for the working class? Why only them? So I wanted to kind of take a step back and talk a little bit about why I created this series. So I have a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology. I also hold a master's degree in social and philosophical foundations of education. And I always make sure that I talk about my credentials because I want people to understand the place that a lot of my belief systems have kind of been shaped by in addition to my experience. So with my bachelor's degree in psychology, I took two key courses that really kind of restructured or rewired my thinking. The first was industrial psychology. In that course, I remember learning about workers in corporate America, workers who worked in factories who were working class, workers who were more degreed, that worked in more traditional careers, and the differences or the behaviors that different people have depending on the types of jobs that they have. And one of the things that I remember learning in that class was that, workers tend to band, people from the working class tend to band together a little bit more. They tend to push more for raises. They tend to unionize. They tend to want to push for their rights because they're getting less resources. They're getting less money. They're getting less flexibility. They're getting less access to retirement. And they're getting less access to full-time positions, which in turn makes them have to get several part-time jobs, or what I call gigs. I also took a class called Stress and Its Management, and this was pretty critical for me because at the time that I took that course, I was going through a lot, and it really opened up my eyes about what stress does to the body. It makes you, it can make you physically sick, it can make you mentally sick. People who experience large amounts of stress end up having all types of metabolic diseases, from cancer to diabetes to high blood pressure to high cholesterol, because the mental stress can make you want to eat more. It can cause all types of eating disorders. And so the need for me to help people understand that in a way that's digestible for them, not just in the academic papers I write, but also in an online series so people know the impact that these things can have on your physical well-being and your overall health, which impacts your wealth as a unit. So I ended up understanding, because of my degree in psychology, I ended up understanding the need to focus on the working class and to provide as many resources, because there's more working class folks within the United States than any other class. And so it's important to make sure that they have just as much access as anyone else. The other thing that I did, I ended up earning a Master of Arts degree in social and philosophical foundations of education. And that's when I learned about class status and class warfare. Now, of course, I learned a lot from my mother, who was an activist in Chicago, who was in the arts community. I learned a lot from her about class warfare. But when I learned about class status and class warfare in my master's program, in terms of the elimination of what was called government compensatory programming, and how, different political parties, both Democrat and Republican, tend to dismantle social programs for the working class. And so, it's important that not only do people organize around issues that make sense for them, right? So you see mothers advocating so that they can get leave, right? You think about a lot of people during the civil rights movement, they were also organizing around the idea of focusing on the working class. And so now that we have social media, it really is important for us to understand that this is a medium, this is a way for us to really reach out to people, I don't know how far this podcast is going to go. It could go all the way over to another country. But it's important that we make sure that we reach people as much as possible and we begin to share information. So these two factors, along with my upbringing, help me to understand the need to limit stress, to rest, to work smarter, not harder, acquire skills, certifications, trades, and degrees. So if you're somebody who's constantly arguing, saying, we need to go in the skilled trade, we need to do the, stop arguing about any of that. What we need to be focusing on is skill acquirement, certifications, trades, and degrees that kind of give people a leg up. Because your plan for how you go to school is based on your needs, your individual needs. And then collectively, as a group, you look at what's good for the group in terms of using your degree to help the group. It's a lot with group dynamics and things like that. So I wanted to focus on gigs because I wanted to help people to understand how I made it through school. You know, I came from a working class background, and I still have a lot of values from the working class. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm from the Midwest. I lived in the Midwestern states that I lived in, you know, at the time were unionized. You know, so I have a core value about ensuring that workers have rights, but also, you know, helping people to understand how to get around a lot of this silliness that is permeating the job market. I've always been able to get jobs. Just because I'm somebody who always stays current, when I start to see things change, you know, I immediately start changing, because it's a sign. When you go to a meeting and there's a surprise, that's a sign. When you go to have a conversation with an administrator or a boss and they tell you something that you weren't expecting, that's a sign. So it's just certain things that you learn that are signposts that should make you start retraining, retooling, and making sure that you move forward. So I worked 3 jobs all through school. I had every kind of job you could name. I was a podiatrist assistant. You want to talk about a disgusting job? I was a tour guide for my university. I worked, when I had a master's degree, I had 2 assistantships. I worked in the dormitory. I also taught classes. And then I worked over at the hospital on the weekend. It was just part of my working class ideology to find jobs that, you know, didn't take so much out of me, but paid a higher hourly wage and allowed me to pay my bills and also save money, because that's really important. And so throughout this series, I'll be talking about that. But one of the things that I want to talk to you all about is that when you get gigs and part-time jobs, it's really important that you get a gig with benefits. And you work jobs simultaneously that help you earn income. And I'm going to talk about why. You know, gigs offer job stability, extra funds, and they often reduce stress. And I know people are like, well, how can that be? Because you're working 3 jobs. Right, but if you're working 3 jobs at a higher hourly wage than the one job you're working, that you're not even working full time for because they've cut your hours from 40 to 35, you're actually making more money. And this is why we need to start having these conversations, because we need to step back and think about how much money we're actually making on paper and in reality after taxes. So one thing I always learned, and I learned this one actually from my grandmother, who passed it down to my mother, who passed it down to me. One thing I learned is that you want to always have what my community called a job and a half. Now, I'm from a proud working class black community in Chicago. I grew up on the south side. We also moved over to the north side of Chicago. But we used to always keep what was called a job and a half. So the concept behind a job and a half is that you have your gig, and your gig might be full, it might be full-time 40 hours, or it might be 35, where people only give you 35 hours so that they don't have to pay you benefits depending on the rules for the state. So what a lot of people will do is, if you know your schedule is going to be the same, you go off and you get another side gig that you can do on the side that nobody knows about. So one of the other concept behind this is that people get fired all the time, especially in economies like this. This stuff was going on during the Reagan administration as well. People got fired just left and right. So what people would do is they always had things on the side, because the concept was that a steady paycheck goes a long way. So I'm going to give you an example. My grandmother, she was working for one of the corporations in downtown Chicago. You know, they ended up closing the corporation. She owned stock. She was one of the first African Americans who actually worked there. She was a clerk. You know, she just filed papers. You know, she was very good at her job. You know, she was the kind of person that would bake goodies and bring them into the job and kind of humanize the work environment. So everybody loved her. So she ended up, there was an attorney that knew her, and he had heard that the business was going to close. So he was like, I'm going to give you some advice as a client. I need $1. So my grandma paid him $1. So he said, hey, your business is getting ready to close, so they're going to probably gather you into a room. So I'm going to tell you right now, this is what you do. You take the money. And my grandmother, she didn't even know what was going on. But he said, just take my advice. You know, I'm a corporate attorney. I'm giving you this advice. You're my client. Take the money. So my grandmother goes to the meeting, and she's in there, and they fire everybody. So they bring everybody into the room individually. They tell them, well, you can keep your stock options, or you can take a check now. My grandmother said, I'll take the check now. I'll take my money now. And they shuffled back and forth. They didn't want her to do it. But she ended up taking the money. And she took that money where she had cashed out basically her retirement. You know, this is a tax liability, but she took it anyway because it was the right thing to do for her. And she took that and paid off her house. So she still had to have cash flow coming in. So my grandmother got some gigs together. She could always sew, so she started sewing. She was the seamstress for the neighborhood. That was one gig. She would babysit, so she had a couple of children. That was her second gig. So she sewed on the weekend when she didn't have any children around. She babysat during the week when she had children around. That was her second gig. For her third gig, on Sundays, my grandmother didn't sew. She didn't watch children. Before church, she would get up and bake. And she sewed cupcakes. And that was her third gig. So that's what I mean about understanding a job and a half. My grandma had those 3 gigs going. And, you know, she didn't miss a beat with her bills because of that. And I learned so much from her about ensuring that you always have something on the side. And no one needs to know your business. Just have something on the side. Because your financial business isn't anybody else's business. And we need to start normalizing that culture. Because when people at your job know all of your financial business, it gives way for people to manipulate and hurt you. And they don't need to know it. And just so you all know, the people that my grandmother worked with, they were laughing at her. And then a couple of weeks later, they were calling the house because the company closed down and they owned stock options, not bonds. They were not able to receive one dime of their retirement that they had worked for 10 years for. And they had talked to attorneys, and it was nothing that they could do. Even though my grandmother had told them the same thing, to go in and get the money. They didn't believe her. And they ended up with nothing. And so, you know, making sure you have good information is also part of that battle. So I will be doing more podcasts and more educational videos. As I learn more, I will teach more, because as a trade, I also have a master's degree in teaching. And so I will be using that degree via YouTube to talk about a number of topics related to financial literacy, literacy for youth, as well as other lifestyle issues that I believe are important. So as we talk more about financial literacy with this series of gigs for for the working class in a fractured economy, I want you all to please follow my YouTube channel for updates. I have already posted videos 1 through 6, and I want you all to take a look at those because there's some important information in there. I talk about the gig. I talk about where to find the gig. I actually post job links so that you can go to those specific links and get those jobs. And I also post links so that you can get certified because there's free certifications for the majority of the gigs that I'm posting. And so I'm going to talk more about how to get more benefits from your job. That's going to be a whole nother series that I do. But I wanted to share this information with you because it's critical. It's also important that you share this information with other people. So if you have just stumbled across my YouTube channel, I want you to follow my YouTube channel and share my content and updates. I'm hoping that this information begins to reach a wider audience, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to help as many people as possible. Please remember that people are hurting. They need help. They don't need criticism. They don't need people gaslighting them. They don't need people being condescending towards them. They don't need people acting as if they are superior because they were lucky enough to just still be working in this fractured economy. Always give people the grace that you want to receive. I learned that from my grandmother. I hope you learned similar lessons about how to treat people. This is Dr. Tiffany A. Flowers,